are you watching from tonight? Have you ever looked up at the moon, wondering if what you've been told all your life is true? For decades, we've been told a grand story, one of man's greatest achievements, landing on the moon. But what if I told you that it was all a lie? That everything we knew was just a well-crafted illusion? What if the moon landing wasn't just fake, but part of a much larger conspiracy? This story is personal. It's about my journey to uncover the truth they've been hiding from us all along. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at the night sky the same way again. I was just an ordinary person like you, going about my daily life, trusting what I'd been taught in school. The history books, the documentaries, the endless streams of moon landing footage, they were all part of the narrative I accepted without question. But everything changed one fateful evening. It all started with a video. You know the kind. One of those late-night conspiracy rabbit holes you fall into when you're bored, unable to sleep, and scrolling through your feed. The title caught my eye. They have been lying to you. The moon landing was staged. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something about it, I don't know. Maybe it was the eerie music in the background or the thumbnail showing a man in a spacesuit with strings attached to his helmet, like a puppet being controlled from above. I clicked play. The video opened with grainy footage of the Apollo 11 mission. But as the narrator began speaking, his voice was calm, almost too calm, like he was revealing a dark secret he wasn't supposed to share. They told us that in 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the moon, the voice said. But what if I told you that never happened? That the entire mission was staged, filmed in a studio, and the footage we've all seen, nothing but an elaborate hoax. The camera zoomed in on an astronaut's boot pressing into the moon's surface. But as it did, the narrator pointed out something strange. "Notice anything?" he asked. "There's no dust. In real lunar conditions, the impact of the boot would have created a cloud of dust, which would have taken time to settle due to the moon's lower gravity. But here? Nothing." I paused the video and sat back. My mind raced. It was just a video, right? Probably one of those silly conspiracy theories that people make to get views. But something about it stuck with me. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling. Everywhere I went, I kept thinking about the moon landing. Why would they lie about something like that? What could they possibly gain? I wasn't a conspiracy theorist. I had never believed in UFOs or flat Earth or any of those wild ideas people on the internet seemed obsessed with. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew. I decided to dig deeper. I spent hours online reading forums, watching documentaries, both the ones that supported the moon landing and those that claimed it was fake. The evidence against it was surprisingly compelling. Some scientists even suggested that the radiation belts surrounding Earth would have made it impossible for astronauts to survive the trip. I became obsessed, and it wasn't long before I stumbled upon something that changed everything. It was an old, forgotten forum. Hidden in the deep recesses of the internet, it was filled with posts from people who claimed to have first-hand knowledge of the moon landing cover-up. Most of them seemed crazy, their stories far-fetched and disjointed. But one post stood out. The user went by the name Eagle One, and they claimed to have worked on the Apollo missions. In a lengthy post, they described how the entire thing had been filmed in a secret underground studio, funded by the government and supervised by Hollywood directors. The moon landing was never about space exploration, they wrote. It was about power, control. They needed the world to believe they were capable of anything. The moon was just the beginning. I didn't know if I believed it, but I was intrigued. I sent Eagle One a private message asking if they had any proof. To my surprise, they replied almost immediately. "Meet me in person," they wrote. "I'll show you everything." The message came with a location, a small, nondescript cafe on the outskirts of town. It felt like something out of a spy movie. I debated whether or not to go. What if it was a trap? What if I was walking into some kind of elaborate joke? But curiosity got the better of me. The cafe was almost empty when I arrived. I scanned the room, unsure of who I was looking for. Then in the corner, I saw a man. He was older, in his late 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes. He waved me over. "You must be the one asking about the moon landing," he said quietly as I sat down. His voice was low, as if he was afraid someone might overhear. I nodded. "You said you had proof." He smiled faintly and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, worn notebook. "This is my life's work," he whispered. "Everything I've seen, everything I know." I took the notebook, my hands shaking slightly. Inside were pages of detailed notes, diagrams, even photographs. Some showed what looked like a soundstage, complete with astronauts in full gear, surrounded by cameras and lights. Others were documents, contracts signed by officials whose names I recognized but never thought would be involved in something like this. This can't be real," I stammered. "Why would they do this? Why would they fake it?" He leaned in closer, his voice barely audible now. "Because the truth is much darker than you think. It's not just about the moon. They've been lying to us for decades, controlling the narrative, hiding things from us. The moon landing was just the beginning. There's more out there, things they don't want us to know." I left the cafe that day with my mind reeling. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Was this man telling the truth? Or was he just another conspiracy nut, feeding me lies to fuel my paranoia? But the evidence, it was hard to ignore. The photos, the documents, they seemed too detailed, too authentic to be fake. I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. There's more out there, things they don't want us to know. What else had they been hiding? As the days went on, I found myself slipping deeper into the conspiracy. I started seeing connections where I hadn't before. News reports, government announcements, even the way the media portrayed space exploration. It all felt like part of a grand illusion. It was as if they were trying to distract us, to keep our focus on the stars so we wouldn't notice what was happening here on Earth. I reached out to Eagle One again, desperate for more answers. But this time there was no response. His account had been deleted. It was as if he had never existed. Then, one night, I got a call. It was a blocked number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Stop asking questions," a distorted voice said on the other end. "You're getting too close to the truth." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. This was bigger than I had imagined. Someone, maybe even the government, was watching me, trying to silence me. But I wasn't about to stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people I thought I knew. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous things became. Strange cars started following me, and I noticed unfamiliar faces watching me from across the street. They were trying to scare me, to make me back off, but I wasn't going to let them. I needed to find out the truth, about the moon, about everything. The days following that call felt like a blur of paranoia and confusion. Every shadow seemed longer, every stranger more suspicious. I had always been someone who believed in logic and reason, but now I was questioning everything. Was I really being followed? Were the government agents or some shadowy organization watching me? Or had my mind become so consumed with conspiracy that I was imagining things? One evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The night air was cool, and the streetlights cast long, flickering shadows on the pavement. I didn't have a destination in mind, but walking helped me think. As I wandered through the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, there was a dark car creeping slowly behind me, its headlights off. I quickened my pace, and so did the car. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins. I ducked into an alley, hoping to lose whoever was following me. The car came to a stop at the entrance of the alley, its engine humming softly. I pressed myself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally drove away, its tires screeching as it turned the corner. I exhaled shakily and leaned against the cold brick wall. It was real. They were watching me. I knew I couldn't go home. If they were following me, they probably knew where I lived. I needed a plan, and fast. I pulled out my phone and searched for a place I could lie low for a while, somewhere they wouldn't expect me to go. An old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, lived out of town. It was risky, but it was my best option. I packed a bag and left that night, driving with no clear destination in mind, just away from the danger. As the miles stretched on and the city faded into the distance, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but there was no turning back now. I arrived at my friend Mark's house just after midnight. He lived in a small cabin in the woods, miles away from any major roads or towns. The isolation made it the perfect hiding spot. Mark opened the door, surprised to see me after all these years. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "I need a place to stay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's complicated." He looked me up and down, noticing the disheveled state I was in, but didn't ask any more questions. Mark had always been the kind of person who didn't pry, and for that, I was grateful. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together everything I had learned. I pored over the notebook Eagle One had given me, analyzing every detail, every photograph, every note. The deeper I dove into the pages, the more I began to see a pattern. There were mentions of other missions, secret ones that had never been disclosed to the public. Some of them even involved astronauts who had supposedly died under mysterious circumstances. It seemed the moon landing was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Mark noticed my obsession. One night, as I sat hunched over the notebook, he asked, "What's going on with you? You've been acting strange since you got here." I hesitated for a moment before deciding to tell him everything. From the video that had started it all, to the strange encounter with Eagle One, to the car that had followed me through the city. As I spoke, Mark's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "You really believe the moon landing was faked?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "I don't know what to believe anymore," I admitted. "But there's something they're not telling us. I can feel it." Mark sighed and shook his head. "You've got to be careful with this kind of stuff, man. People have gone down that rabbit hole and never come back." Just as I was about to respond, my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number again. My heart skipped a beat. I showed the screen to Mark and his eyes widened. "Don't answer it," he warned. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't distorted. It was clear, calm, and authoritative. "We know where you are," the voice said. "Stop digging or there will be consequences." My blood ran cold. I hung up immediately, my hands trembling. Mark looked at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. "What the hell was that?" "They're watching me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They know where I am." Mark stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "This is bad. This is really bad." That night we decided to lay low, locking the doors and keeping the lights off. Every creak, every rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I couldn't sleep, knowing that at any moment someone could be outside, waiting. In the dead of night, there was a loud knock at the door. Mark and I exchanged a terrified glance. "Stay here," he whispered, grabbing a baseball bat from the corner of the room. He cautiously approached the door, peering through the peephole. "It's just a package," he said, his voice filled with relief. He opened the door slightly and reached down to grab the box, but as soon as he touched it, there was a blinding flash of light. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my ears ringing. The room was filled with smoke, and Mark was nowhere to be seen. I struggled to my feet, disoriented and scared out of my mind. The front door was wide open, the cold night air pouring in. "Mark?" I called out, but there was no response. I stumbled outside, calling his name again and again, but the woods were silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Mark was gone. Panic set in. Whoever had left that package wasn't playing games anymore. They had taken Mark, and I was next. I grabbed my things and bolted to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As soon as the engine roared to life, I sped down the dirt road, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to find Mark. I had to figure out what was going on. But most of all, I had to survive. The drive felt endless. the dark road stretching out before me like a nightmare with no end in sight. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything. What had I gotten myself into? Why had they taken Mark and not me? And most importantly, what was the real truth behind the moon landing? As I drove, I noticed a black SUV in my rearview mirror. My heart sank. It was them. They had found me again. I pressed down on the accelerator, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. But the SUV kept pace, its headlights blinding in my rearview mirror. I swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose them, but they followed me, relentless. The chase went on for miles, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake them. They were too fast, too determined. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I spotted an old abandoned building up ahead. I didn't have time to think. I veered off the road and sped toward it, my tires skidding as I pulled into the overgrown parking lot. I jumped out of the car and sprinted inside, hoping to find a place to hide. The building was dark and empty, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. I darted through the hallways, searching for a place to hide. The sound of the SUV's engine grew closer, and I knew they were coming. I found an old storage room in the back of the building and hid behind a stack of crates. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the sound of footsteps approaching. They were inside. The footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, growing louder with each passing second. My breath was shallow, my chest tightening as I crouched behind the crates. I strained to hear, my senses heightened by fear. The silence between each step felt unbearable, like the calm before a storm. Whoever was out there moved methodically, as if they knew exactly where I was hiding. A door creaked open in the distance, followed by more footsteps. They were close now, maybe just a few rooms away. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my breathing quiet, but every inhale felt like a betrayal. My mind raced, trying to figure out my next move, but there was nowhere to run. I was trapped. Then the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, my muscles tensed, waiting for something, anything to happen. The silence was suffocating. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Suddenly, a voice pierced the quiet. "We know you're here." It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a threat. It was a calm, confident statement. The voice was closer than I had anticipated, just outside the door. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from making a sound. "You can't run from the truth forever." The door to the storage room creaked open. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to become invisible behind the crates. I could hear them breathing now, one person, maybe two, standing just feet away from me. The rustle of their clothing, the faint shuffle of shoes on the dusty floor, every sound was magnified in my ears. A flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating the walls in harsh white light. I saw the glow creep around the edges of the crates and instinctively pulled my legs closer to my body, hoping they wouldn't catch the movement. The light passed, and for a moment, I thought they were going to leave. Then the crate in front of me shifted. My heart lurched in my chest as I realized they were moving the crates one by one, searching for me. I clenched my fists, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body was frozen in fear. The crate moved again, and I could see the outline of a figure through the gaps in the wood. Whoever it was, they were right there, just inches away from discovering me. "I found something," the voice said again, eerily calm. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as the crate in front of me was pushed aside, revealing my hiding place. I scrambled backward, instinctively trying to get to my feet, but it was too late. A flashlight beam hit me directly in the face, blinding me. I raised my arm to shield my eyes, but a rough hand grabbed my wrist, yanking me forward. "Stop! Let go of me!" I shouted, struggling against their grip. But it was no use. The figure pulled me to my feet with ease. I caught a glimpse of their face, sharp, angular features, cold, emotionless eyes. There were two of them, both dressed in black suits, their expressions unreadable. "You should have stopped while you were ahead," one of them said, his voice as flat and emotionless as his eyes. Before I could respond, something sharp pricked the side of my neck. I gasped in shock, reaching up to grab at whatever had pierced my skin, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish. My vision blurred and the room started to spin. I tried to fight it, but my body betrayed me. Darkness closed in and I collapsed to the floor, my consciousness slipping away. I woke up in a cold, dimly lit room, my head throbbing. My mouth was dry and my body felt like it had been hit by a truck. I blinked several times, trying to clear the fog from my vision. The room was small and bare, with concrete walls and a single metal door. I was strapped to a chair, my wrists and ankles bound by thick metal cuffs. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the restraints, but they didn't budge. I was trapped. The events leading up to this moment flooded back into my mind. The chase, the abandoned building, the men in suits. Whoever had taken me wasn't just some random group of thugs. This was organized, professional. Suddenly, the door creaked open and a man stepped inside. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a stern, calculating expression. He wore a dark suit, similar to the men who had captured me, but there was something different about him. He exuded authority. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from me, studying me with cold, piercing eyes. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just watched me squirm in my chair. Finally, he spoke. "You've been asking a lot of questions." I stared at him, my mouth dry, unsure of what to say. My heart raced, but I tried to keep my face calm, not wanting to give away my fear. "You should have left well enough alone," he continued, his voice low and menacing. "People like you never understand. There are things you're not meant to know." What do you want from me?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. The man leaned forward, folding his hands in his lap. "It's not about what we want from you. It's about what you've already seen, what you've uncovered." I frowned, confused. The moon landing. It was faked, wasn't it? "You've been lying to the whole world." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You still don't get it, do you? The moon landing. It's just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. There are bigger things at play, things you could never comprehend." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? What's really going on?" He stood up, walking over to the door. "You've come too close to the truth. That's why we had to step in. But don't worry, you won't be a problem for much longer." My stomach dropped as the door opened again and two more men in suits entered the room. They moved toward me with purpose, and I knew in that moment that I was in serious trouble. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice desperate. "You can't do this! I won't say anything, I promise!" But the man who had interrogated me just shook his head, a look of pity crossing his face. "It's too late for that." The men grabbed me, unstrapping me from the chair and dragging me toward the door. I fought against them, but they were too strong. My heart pounded in my chest as I was pulled down a long, dark hallway, my mind racing with fear and panic. I didn't know where they were taking me, but I knew it wasn't anywhere good. As they dragged me down the cold, dimly lit hallway, fear consumed every part of me. My legs felt like lead, too weak to support my weight, and my wrists burned from the tight grip of the men. The hallway stretched out endlessly, the fluorescent lights above flickering and buzzing with an eerie hum. I tried to fight back, twisting and jerking my arms, but their grip was ironclad. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded, though my voice trembled with fear more than defiance. Neither of the men answered. Their faces remained expressionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead. It was as if they were machines, programmed only to follow orders. The silence was unnerving, each footstep echoing in the empty corridor, adding to the tension. I felt my heart rate spike as we approached a heavy metal door at the end of the hallway. The door looked thick, reinforced, like it was meant to keep something in, or maybe to keep someone out. The man on my left swiped a key card, and with a loud mechanical clunk, the door unlocked. They pulled me through the doorway, and I was thrust into a large, sterile room. The room was stark, white, and clinical, completely out of place compared to the damp and decaying hallways we had just passed through. The air inside was cold, biting against my skin. There was a long steel table in the center of the room, surrounded by various machines I didn't recognize. Panic rose in my chest. This wasn't an interrogation room. It was something far worse. "What is this place?" I choked out, my eyes darting around for an exit, a way out, anything. Still, no one answered me. One of the men pushed me toward the steel table, forcing me down onto it. I thrashed, trying to break free, but they were too strong. They secured leather straps around my wrists and ankles, pinning me to the cold surface. My breathing quickened as the full weight of my situation began to settle in. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't going to end well for me. The older man, the one who had interrogated me earlier, entered the room, followed by a group of people dressed in lab coats. He stood by the door, arms crossed, watching as the scientists, or doctors, whoever they were, began preparing equipment on the nearby counter. There was a buzz of quiet conversation among them, too low for me to make out what they were saying. My chest tightened, and I couldn't stop my body from trembling. What are you going to do to me?" I asked, my voice cracking. The older man finally spoke, his tone cold and detached. "You've seen too much. We can't let you walk away knowing what you know, so we're going to make sure you forget. Permanently." "Forget?" I repeated, my mind spinning. "You're going to erase my memory?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Something like that. I pulled at the straps, my heart hammering in my chest. "You can't do this. People know I'm looking into this. If I disappear, they'll come looking for me." The man raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we're not going to make you disappear. In fact, you'll walk out of here alive. But you'll be a different person. You won't even remember your own name, let alone the secrets you've uncovered." Terror coursed through me. This was worse than anything I could have imagined. They weren't just going to silence me. They were going to erase me, erase everything I knew, everything I was. One of the scientists approached with a syringe, the liquid inside glowing faintly. My pulse quickened as I watched them draw closer, the needle gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I struggled harder, but it was no use. The restraints were too tight. "No, you can't do this!" I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. But they ignored me. The needle pricked my arm, and I felt a cold sensation spread through my veins. My head began to swim, and my vision blurred as whatever drug they had injected into me took hold. My thoughts became fuzzy, like I was drifting in and out of consciousness. Just before I lost control of my body, I caught the older man's voice, distant and hollow. "You should have left well enough alone. Now no one will ever know the truth." I woke up in a daze, my head throbbing and my mouth dry. I was no longer strapped to the table, but lying on a simple cot in a small, windowless room. My mind felt sluggish, like I was swimming through fog. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I had gotten here. Panic gripped me as I tried to piece together the fragments of my memory, but something was missing, something important. I sat up, rubbing my temples, trying to shake the haze from my mind. My thoughts were jumbled, slipping through my fingers like water. I couldn't even remember my own name. The door to the room creaked open, and the older man from before entered, his expression unreadable. He stood there for a moment, watching me, as if assessing how much of me was left. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. I swallowed hard, trying to gather my thoughts. I don't know. What happened?" He smiled faintly. "You've been through quite an ordeal. But don't worry, you're safe now. Everything has been taken care of." Taken care of? What did that mean? I looked around the small room, confusion clouding my thoughts. Nothing made sense. Why couldn't I remember anything? My mind was a blank slate. I didn't even know who I was. What's my name?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man's smile widened. "Your name? That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you're free now. Free from the lies, free from the burdens of knowledge." I frowned, the words not making sense. "Lies? What lies?" He stepped closer, his expression softening, almost pitying. "The lies that have kept humanity in the dark for so long. But now, you won't have to worry about them anymore. You're free from the truth." His words sent a chill down my spine. Free from the truth? What truth? Why couldn't I remember? I don't understand," I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. The man placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "You don't need to understand. All you need to know is that the world is a better place without people like you asking questions. People like you make things complicated." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. "But what did I do? Why can't I remember anything?" He sighed, his expression turning cold once more. You ask too many questions, questions that weren't meant to be answered. And now you're just another lost soul, another casualty of the truth. I recoiled from his words, fear gripping me. I had no idea what he was talking about, but deep down I knew that something had been taken from me, something important. I had no memory of who I was or what I had done, but I could feel the emptiness inside me, the void where my identity had once been. The man turned to leave, pausing at the door. In time, you'll forget you ever questioned anything, and when you do, you'll find peace, just like the rest of the world. With that, he stepped out of the room, closing the door behind him. I was left alone, sitting in the dim light, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who was I? What had I uncovered? Why had they erased my memory? But no matter how hard I tried to remember, the answers were just out of reach, lost in the fog that clouded my mind. And that's when I realized the horrifying truth. They hadn't just erased my memory, they had erased me. Days turned into weeks, and I remained trapped in that small, windowless room. My mind was a constant fog, like an impenetrable wall stood between me and my past. Every time I tried to remember something, anything, it was as if my thoughts would slip away, evaporating into nothing. The feeling of emptiness weighed on me, gnawing at my sanity. I had no name, no history, and no purpose. The older man, who I had come to know as director, visited often. He never answered any of my questions directly, only offering cryptic reassurances that I was safe now, as if that was supposed to bring me comfort. Every visit was the same, his cold, detached voice, the sterile clinical room, and my growing sense of despair. But there was something else gnawing at me. I started noticing oddities, small things that made me question even more. There were no windows in my room, and yet I never felt the passage of time. The food trays were brought at irregular intervals. Sometimes hours would pass between meals. Sometimes it felt like days. The lights overhead never flickered or dimmed. They stayed at the same unnatural brightness no matter what. It was as if I were in some kind of timeless limbo. One day I decided to test a theory. I scratched a small mark into the wall using the edge of my food tray, just a simple line to track the days, or what I assumed were days. But when I woke the next time, the mark was gone. The wall was perfectly smooth, as if nothing had ever been there. Panic started to rise in me. How long had I been here? Weeks? Months? I couldn't tell. My sense of reality was slipping, like the ground beneath me was dissolving. The director's words echoed in my mind. You'll forget you ever questioned anything. Was that what this was? A slow, creeping erasure of my thoughts, my will, my very self? I began to wonder if I was being drugged, if every meal contained something that kept me docile, compliant, and increasingly confused. I couldn't trust anything anymore, not even my own senses. Then came the day when everything changed. I had been lying on the cot, staring blankly at the ceiling when the door to my room creaked open. I expected to see one of the usual guards or perhaps the director, but instead, a young woman stepped inside. She was dressed in the same sterile white uniform as the others, but there was something different about her. Her eyes, they weren't cold or detached like everyone else I had encountered. Instead, they held a flicker of sympathy. She glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping further into the room. "We don't have much time," she whispered. I sat up, my heart suddenly racing. "What do you mean?" "They've been lying to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You weren't supposed to be here this long. They're erasing people's minds. You were never meant to know the truth." The fog in my mind seemed to lift, just slightly. What truth? What are they doing to me? She took a deep breath, clearly struggling with how much she should say. "The moon landing, it wasn't just a hoax. It's so much bigger than that. They've been covering up what they really found." My pulse quickened. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but the words sent a chill through me. "What did they find?" She glanced toward the door again, clearly terrified of being overheard. "When they went to the moon, they found something they couldn't explain. The footage, the recordings, they weren't staged to cover up a fake landing. They were staged to hide what was really up there." I stared at her, my mind racing. What was it? I don't know all the details, but from what I've overheard, it was some kind of structure, a base or maybe a city, not human. I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. Aliens? She shook her head. Not exactly. Whatever it is, it's old, older than anything we know, and they've been hiding it ever since. Anyone who gets too close to the truth, they end up here. The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I thought I knew was crumbling before me. The moon landing wasn't just a hoax. It was a cover-up for something far more terrifying. The woman stepped closer, her voice urgent. They're going to erase you completely. If you don't escape now, you'll lose everything. Your memories, your mind, your identity. You'll be just another blank slate. How do I get out of here? I asked, desperation clawing at my voice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metallic object. This is a key card. It'll get you past the first few security doors, but after that, you're on your own. There's a tunnel system beneath the facility. If you can find it, it'll lead you out. I grabbed the key card, my hands shaking. Why are you helping me? She hesitated, her eyes clouded with emotion. Because I've seen what they do to people in this place. It's wrong. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help at least one person. I stared at her, overwhelmed with a mix of gratitude and fear. Thank you. She nodded, her expression serious. You need to move fast. The security system will detect the breach as soon as you open the first door. Once that happens, you'll have minutes, maybe seconds, before they're onto you. I stood, my legs unsteady. I'll find a way out. She opened the door a crack, checking the hallway before gesturing for me to follow. Go now, and don't look back. With one last glance, I slipped out of the room and into the hallway, the keycard clenched tightly in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The corridors were eerily silent, the same cold, sterile atmosphere surrounding me as before. But now, every step felt like a countdown to disaster. I found the first security door just around the corner. Swiping the key card, I held my breath as the door clicked open. I slipped through, my body tense with the fear of being caught. As I navigated through the maze-like facility, my mind raced with questions. What had I uncovered? What was this ancient structure on the moon? And why had they gone to such lengths to hide it? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this went beyond just covering up a failed mission. They were hiding something much more profound, something that could change everything we knew about our place in the universe. But I couldn't dwell on it now. I had to survive. Finally, I reached a large reinforced door, the last one before the tunnels. My hands were shaking as I swiped the key card, praying it would work. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark, damp tunnel leading downward. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. I could hear the distant hum of alarms beginning to sound. Someone had realized I was gone. With no time to waste, I sprinted down the tunnel, the sound of footsteps growing louder behind me. As I raced down the tunnel, the walls seemed to close in, and the air grew heavier. My breath came in sharp gasps as I pushed myself harder, the footsteps of my pursuers echoing behind me. I didn't dare look back. My entire focus was on getting as far away from them as possible. The tunnel was damp and cold, like I had descended into the earth itself. The ceiling was low, forcing me to crouch as I moved. The lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the wet stone walls. I tried to suppress the panic that was building inside me, but the constant thud of my heartbeat in my ears made it hard to think clearly. Suddenly, the tunnel forked into two separate paths. I hesitated for a split second, unsure of which way to go. My mind screamed for me to pick a direction, any direction, but indecision paralyzed me for a heartbeat too long. Behind me, I could hear the distinct sound of boots clattering against the tunnel floor. They were getting closer. With no time to waste, I picked the left path and sprinted forward. The air in the tunnel felt even more stifling now, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I could hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance, but I couldn't see where it was coming from. The tunnel began to twist and turn, its labyrinthine design confusing my sense of direction. Was I still heading in the right way? Or was I running straight into a trap? I forced those thoughts away. There was no time for doubt. I had to keep moving. After what felt like hours of running, the tunnel opened up into a small chamber. I paused, gasping for air, trying to get my bearings. The room was dimly lit, with only a few faint lights overhead casting weak shadows on the walls. In the center of the room was an old, rusted hatch set into the floor. My heart leaped with hope. Maybe this was my way out. I rushed to the hatch and pulled at the metal handle. It groaned loudly in protest but didn't budge. Frustration surged through me as I pulled harder, my arms straining with the effort. Still, the hatch refused to open. Behind me, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Panic set in as I realized I was running out of time. I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could help. My eyes landed on a rusted crowbar lying in the corner. Grabbing it, I jammed the crowbar into the edge of the hatch and pried with all my strength. The metal creaked and groaned, but slowly it began to give way. With a final desperate pull, the hatch flew open with a loud clang, revealing a dark shaft leading downward. Without a second thought, I jumped into the shaft, sliding down into the darkness. The cold, damp air rushed past me as I descended, and the narrow walls of the shaft seemed to close in around me. For a moment, I feared I had made a terrible mistake, that this shaft would lead me to an even worse fate. But there was no turning back now. After what felt like an eternity, the shaft spat me out into another tunnel, this one much narrower and darker than the previous one. My legs buckled beneath me as I hit the ground, but I forced myself up, wincing at the sharp pain in my ankle. I didn't have time to dwell on it. I could still hear the faint echoes of my pursuers above. I limped down the tunnel, my eyes straining to see in the near-total darkness. The walls here were rough and jagged, and the air smelled stale, as if no one had been down here in years. My only hope was that this tunnel would lead me to some kind of exit, some way out of this nightmare. As I stumbled forward, my thoughts returned to what the young woman had told me, an ancient structure on the moon, something not human. The conspiracy was far bigger than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about faking the moon landing. It was about hiding the truth of what they had found up there. What had they discovered that was so terrifying they needed to erase people's memories just to keep it a secret? The thought sent chills down my spine. Suddenly, the tunnel sloped upward, and I found myself facing a set of old, rusted metal stairs. They led up to a small, circular opening at the top, where a faint light shone through. My heart leaped with hope again. This had to be the way out. I climbed the stairs as quickly as my aching body would allow, my ankle throbbing with every step. The closer I got to the top, the brighter the light became, until I could finally see a small hatch above me. I reached up and pushed against it, and to my surprise, it swung open easily. I emerged into a wide, open space bathed in sunlight. The sudden brightness blinded me for a moment, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized where I was. I had surfaced in the middle of a dense forest. Tall trees surrounded me on all sides, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The fresh air filled my lungs, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of relief. But that relief was short-lived. In the distance, I could hear the unmistakable sound of a helicopter approaching. The low hum of its blades cutting through the air sent a surge of fear through me. They weren't going to let me go that easily. I scrambled to my feet and started running again, pushing through the thick underbrush of the forest. My ankles screamed in protest, but I ignored the pain. All that mattered now was getting as far away from here as possible. The trees blurred around me as I ran, my mind racing just as fast. The conspiracy wasn't just about the moon, it was about everything. They had been lying to us for decades, controlling what we knew, erasing anyone who got too close to the truth. I had to survive. I had to expose what I knew. The helicopter grew louder, its blades thundering overhead. I glanced up and saw it circling above the trees, searching for me. Panic gripped me again as I realized there was nowhere to hide. The forest provided little cover, and the helicopter would spot me at any moment. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted something in the distance, a small cabin nestled among the trees. It was old and run down, but it was my only chance. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning with the effort. As I reached the door, I threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. The cabin was dark and musty, with dust coating every surface. It looked as though no one had lived here for years, but for now it was a safe haven, a place to catch my breath and think. I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. The sound of the helicopter still echoed outside, but for the moment, I was hidden. As I lay there in the darkness, my mind racing with everything I had learned, one thought kept repeating in my head. They had been lying to us all along, and now I was the only one who knew the truth. But for how long?